it down for us. Like I said, we're getting situated, but we're joined by Mr. Steven. Um,
Haagsma.
I remember the first time we did this interview. This is an interview. H.O.M.E has been an organization that's been tied with me for a while. They've been a part of my speaking journey really since my inception. And so this name has been, I've been struggling with it for a couple interviews now, but that's why I call him Mr. Steven, as well as Mr. James later as he gets settled. How are you doing today, Mr. Steven?
I'm good. Thanks for having us back again.
Of course, absolutely. It's a new year, right? New things, great new things going on in Buffalo. Probably some progressions, both for what H.O.M.E is doing, maybe the legal side of renters and getting their rights done. So, are there any overall general things you want to talk about that we're going to be discussing today?
I think I just want to, touch on some of the most important things that people need to know as far as their rights in housing go, because, my job is to make sure that people know their rights so that they can stand up for themselves if those rights aren't being respected when it comes to their housing situation. And, there are lots of protections that are available to people, but they don't do people any good if they don't know that they exist.
Right. And we've touched on some of these rights, talking about some of the the background check prices. They can't, you can use a background check for multiple applications, things of that nature. Can you go over some of these really basic but important ones, these, again, general ones that we should all know, just so we can all be familiar for the listeners and for me alike?
Yeah, like you were saying, there's a limit in New York State to how much landlords can charge for applications. So they can't charge more than $20 to apply for housing, no matter what. And that $20 can only go towards the cost of running a background check or a credit check on someone. So it's $20 per adult person who's looking to live in this particular apartment. But they can't charge more than $20, even if the cost of those checks costs more than that. And if they don't run a background check or a credit check, they can't charge a fee just to apply. It can only be reimbursement for those costs. Then the landlord also has to provide a copy of someone's own credit or background report to them. And then if someone has their own report, they can provide that at other places that they apply, and then they can't be charged an application fee as long as that report's less than 30 days old.
Wow. So most people think that when you do a background check or a credit check, it's a mark on them. Some people like, well, I don't want you to be doing a credit check. I mean, background, I get, but the credit check seems to be the problem on most people, because now it shows more what their faults were, and sometimes that might stop them from getting that apartment. Is that legal to do?
Yeah, unfortunately, landlords can use credit scores to choose who they're going to rent to. Personally, I don't think it's very smart on the landlord's part, because paying rent doesn't help someone's credit score. It's not part of that score most often. And so it's very possible that somebody could have a bad credit score because they have prioritized paying rent in the past over paying other bills that do affect their credit score. So their credit score might be bad because instead of paying those bills, they paid rent instead.
Right.
Which really, that's what a landlord wants. They want somebody who's going to prioritize paying the rent.
Mm-hmm.
But a credit score doesn't actually necessarily reflect whether someone is prioritizing paying rent over paying other things. It's terrible that so many people are in situations where they have to pick and choose what bills to pay. But if you're a landlord, you should be looking for people whose number one priority is paying that rent, because that's what you're being a landlord for. So I encourage landlords to try to take a broader perspective and not just use that credit score, because it doesn't necessarily show how reliable somebody is at paying rent.
Right. And so my question would be, what are some of those better metrics or maybe better questions that you would recommend a landlord would ask to get a better picture of a good renter versus a bad renter, instead of some of these general broad things like credit that we look at?
Yeah, so landlords are allowed to ask for references of prior landlords. So they can talk to the past couple of landlords of this applicant, and they can ask them, did this person pay rent on time? Did they take good care of the house? Was it clean when they left? Those kinds of things. From a landlord's perspective, that's going to give you a better picture of
most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah, I mean, if you ask the most recent landlord where they're still living, if they're a bad tenant, they might tell you something nice to get rid of that person.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
From a landlord's perspective, if you're talking to somebody who is this person's landlord 3 years ago or 4 years ago, that person's habits as a tenant probably haven't gotten worse. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're even a little bit better, but regardless, like that, you're going to find out more useful information that way than just the number that you get from a credit score.
Wow. So what happened during COVID? You probably have a lot of people calling in, and people were getting paid money for rent, and they didn't put it towards the landlord, or the landlord received that funds and didn't apply it to the tenant. Did you have issues about that?
It was tricky. There was the emergency rental assistance program through New York State, and those payments did go directly to the landlord. So with that, it wasn't an issue of tenants not using it properly, because it never was in the tenant's hands to begin with.
Right.
But as with most government programs, it wasn't the fastest. So there was some frustration from both sides, tenants and landlords, that they may have submitted this paperwork and it's months later and no payments have come through. Landlords sometimes blame the tenants for that, even though it's completely out of their hands. It's not their fault at all. So there were some frustrations on both sides, tenants and landlords, I would say, during the pandemic.
And I think that dual-sided relationship is really what I want to highlight. These rules and these boundaries that are written in the law don't only just protect renters, but they protect landlords as well. And there's support for landlords as well, right? If you're thinking about a basketball game, the same rule that says the ball can't go out protects the defense and the offense. And so when we're looking at the landlord side, right, what are some things and support systems that either H.O.M.E or other organizations in Buffalo have to either help train up landlords, give them assistance, or just give them clarity on their journey to be better landlords so we can help and be better for our renters in Buffalo?
Yeah, we offer a free landlord training course. It's available on Zoom. So we do it by webinar. We have a live webinar once a month. So I'm doing that. People can ask me questions and stuff like that. And we also have an on-demand one. That's the same information, and people can view that whenever they have time. And it's really useful information, just kind of like a 101 of fair housing, making sure that they understand the rules that apply to the business that they're running, right? Being a landlord is a business, and just like, somebody who owns a coffee shop can't just choose to ignore health codes. Landlords can't ignore the laws that apply to providing housing to people. So it's just kind of a basic overview of those laws, so that landlords know what's expected of them, so that they can both abide by the law and make sure that they're being the best landlord that they can be.
Okay, so we definitely got what's called at the end. We'll reiterate and make sure we get those resources and all these things that we're talking about reiterated and recap at the end. We were just joined by James. It's great to see you today. Sorry to throw you on the mic so soon, but how are you doing?
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. It's just to save the best for last. So
that's what I like to say. So I know James here. I don't know specifically what you came to talk about, but I know personally that is one of the most well-versed historians, I'll say, on the history of Buffalo and how we got here in the housing market, some of the things that happened. And I do think when we talk about where we want to get to, it's important that we understand where we came from. So if you want to touch on maybe a couple important things that you maybe think are important to understand, or for the average person can get to understand how we got here in the current housing situation, and maybe give some insight on how we can move forward.
Absolutely, and thank you for the kind introduction, Austin. My name is James Coughlin. I work as a fair housing specialist at Housing Opportunities Made Equal, and it's a pleasure to see you as well today, Stephen. I brought with me a copy of my master's thesis, which I've published as a booklet or zine, if you will, called City of Distant Neighbors, the Proliferation and Entrenchment of Residential Segregation in Buffalo, New York. I look at pretty much like the 30s to the early 60s, and more so the consequences and how Buffalo became redlined, the consequences of segregated public housing, urban renewal as well, but also the role of realtors as well, the sort of public and private relationship. And I think, based upon your question of, how might this connect to today, is that we're seeing a lot of like commonalities and similarities as far as, right now we have an existing housing shortage, and that's causing rental prices to increase. And the same thing goes for, as, the 30s and 40s, 50s, as more Black families are migrating from South to cities like Buffalo, you again have a housing shortage within the city, but at the same time, you also have more housing being constructed in like the suburbs or like in North and South Buffalo that are only available to white households, and it therefore creates an artificially segregated and hyper-priced market within the east side, very extractive and predatory, where at the same time it's looking at who has opportunities to build and expand wealth and who are segregated, who's relegated to areas and neighborhoods with limited or finite resources. And with some of the work that Stephen and I and my colleagues do at home, we often try to ask, what is the importance or significance of a home? And for me, like, my research is looking at, well, not only just like a home, the standard of living, the standard of the unit, the relationship with the landlord and the tenant, but also what are the resources around what makes for a stronger neighborhood, for the investments that are there. Are these inequities that the consequences of them, are they being inadequately addressed, or do we still need that strong fair housing lens in order to look at it? And there's, as recently, like Evans Bank, their settlement with the Attorney General, regarding their practices with redlining, and there's also been other reports through the Attorney General's office that show still ongoing disparities with lending to Black and brown families. So as we continue to have a conversation of building more housing, ensuring that folks have opportunities and access to wealth, that it's done in a way that's equitably and also in a way that repairs the harms of the past.
I have no words. That
just wow. But you talk about housing shortages, and my name is Murray Holman.
Murray, yes.
Yes, how you been? I know you
Yes.
very well, out there doing some work in the community. Housing shortages, explain that more to me, because we know that homes are being torn down, but when you say housing shortages, what are you talking about?
Well, in parts, Buffalo, for the first time since 1950, our population has been increasing. Granted, it's a little bit by about 10,000 or so folks, but it's also, you take in a combination, the fact that about 60% to 2/3 of Buffalo's housing stock was built before 1940.
True.
And you ask, who has the opportunity to either buy those up, refurbish those, but also with new housing that's being built, is it affordable for folks that are existing here, or is it more so affordable or accessible to folks that are trying to move to Buffalo? So how is it that we can find solutions in a way where we are empowering folks that are still here and welcoming everyone here, so we can together build and live up to the creed of the city of good neighbors.
So when you say east of Buffalo, let's go there. Now, I don't even call it east side of Buffalo like everyone. East of Buffalo seems to be that more diverse people are buying homes. And I believe that City Hall has sold homes for these crazy prices. When these homes used to be $20,000, $30,000 to purchase, now they're $150,000 at the auction, things like that. They're happening. Landlords are buying these properties. First, they say they're going to put in people that's in that neighborhood. Now they're putting their own folks in there. And then here we are with housing issues in our area. But my thing is, right now, when you say housing shortages, why not build more homes affordable on a low end, not just high end? You got to purchase a house on the east side of Buffalo is roughly about $250,000 plus. And that's just crazy for people that's in poverty to be trying to pay. And then when you say redlining with certain banks and things like that, that plays into the part, right? Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely. And it's not only redlining itself, but what does redlining draw at? It's the environmental justice issues, such as saying, we can build a throughway through this neighborhood and we're okay with dividing it. The issues of where are there brownfields or other environmental hazards, especially with lead or air quality as well. But even just and part of what I look at in my research is the legacy of urban renewal as well. So right around in this neighborhood was the Ellicott Urban Renewal Plan, and the dislocation of about 2,200 or so households, 80% of those being African-American led households, and also 70% of those families that had to relocated in Ellicott or Madison districts. But it was the realtors that had such a large and instrumental role in steering and deciding where we're going to provide housing opportunities to folks. Whereas now, due to, again, the consequences of redlining, we see a lot of vacant lots, a lot of buildings that have been abandoned or dilapidated, but at the same time, how can we use that as an opportunity to, again, to build, to ensure that folks within those neighborhoods that have been historically impacted have the agency, are the stakeholders, and are taking charge to ensure that we're building cohesive neighborhoods, and that for folks who do buy a house or are renting, and as far as what me and Stephen do, that they're following the letter of the law, that they're, that it's going to be amicable landlord-tenant relationships, that everyone's, acting in good faith to ensure that we have a stronger community.
So are you reachable? Are you, usually when you make a call to people like yourself, are you reachable? Are we talking to animation? Are we talking to someone in your office that can really take care of the problem?
Yeah, people can contact us. We can give out our phone number if you want us to.
Sure.
Our phone number is 854-1400. And our office is at 1542 Main Street. It's at the corner of Main and Ferry. And people can walk into our office between 9 and 1 and can ask to see a housing counselor. Otherwise, you can call and set up an appointment if you wanted to come in the afternoon after 1 o'clock. But yeah, we're definitely reachable. We want to help people. And if people have housing questions or housing issues, we want to make sure that people have someone to stand up for them when their rights aren't being respected.
And the way I see it too is that not only that someone that will help stand up for someone, but to ensure folks are empowered as well, that we're giving folks the skill sets to say that I can assert my rights. It's not enough to merely know what your rights may be as a tenant, but how to exercise them as well, and to do so in a lawful way. And myself and our other fair housing specialists, my supervisor Mari, my coworkers Liza and Emily, we often try to see, how is it, in the worst case scenario, if something's going to go to court, how may a judge look at
Mm-hmm.
that? So just, finding the balance of, yes, exercise your rights, doing so, but also in a way of, if, again, worst case scenario, if this goes in front of a court of law, how can you ensure that you're gathering evidence and, defending yourself, exercising those rights?
When we talk about, and I know this is kind of separate outside of realtor, but I'm looking back on the kind of city growth side. Okay, if I have a house, right, and I'm approached by either an organization or someone outside of Buffalo who wants to buy that house. Now I know if we have a housing shortage, I would want to sell to someone who already lives here so we can have someone who already is here have a house, because it's important. But what am I supposed to do? If they're giving me more money, is it wrong for me to act in my best interest? Or how do I look out for my city without feeling like I'm selling myself short and not going what's best for me and my family?
Well, you can't necessarily tell you who to or to not sell your house to, as long as it's not done in a way that is discriminatory. But at the same time, also, whoever you're selling your house to, you can do your part to educate them on what their rights are, either as a landlord, or what the rights of tenants are as well. So, and also, again, like we said, advocacy, ensuring that that part of the relationship can be corrected with building more affordable and accessible housing as well. The advocacy for resources in the neighborhood, and while housing is the anchor, the center of the access to everything else, employment, good wages, transportation, it's being able to do so in a way that you're looking at things holistically, and that relationship, whomever it may be that you're buying it or selling it to, isn't going to be predatory or extractive at all.
Because housing to me really sounds like a part of what we really look at bigger in what this show talks about, just community building.
Yeah.
Right. Like you talked about, somebody moves in, it's okay whether they're here or not from here, but they're going to look out for the best sake of Buffalo because they are here. Right. Similar to what you guys are talking about, whether you're a renter, whether you're a buyer, it doesn't matter. Are we looking out for the best interests of Buffalo as a whole? And Murray, specifically, you talk about when you talk about looking out for the best interests of a whole, you were talking about a program you wanted to mention about sending kids down to see and Motown, again, looking out for that youth aspect as well, not to kind of divert, but I know
that's what we do on the Jim Anderson Show. This is the Jim Anderson Show. Now, actually here at the station, the WFO Mix 1080 and Power 96.5, Ms. Sheila Brown is actually campaigning to take young folks to Motown to see the museum in Motown and things like that there. So they're looking for kids, and they're looking for sponsors to actually help, get some kids to go that way. And so what we're trying to do here on the show is anyone out there want to sponsor a kid, please call the radio station here. And the number is 716-837-1112. And you can call in and make arrangements for a kid to go to Motown, to the museum there, and to see how this business was made up. And you can really look at this place right here. It's similar to how Motown started with the radio stations and things like that there. So Miss Sheila Brown is the person that's spearheading that. We will be going to chaperone some kids there. I believe there's only 56 seats left on that bus, and you have to get your kids here on time and make that be a blessing. What is most powerful about home?
What's most powerful about home?
Yes.
I think that we've been around for a while. You know, last year we celebrated our 60th anniversary. We were founded in 1963.
So I'm all right with that.
And so we actually started our work before the Fair Housing Act was passed. So we have been working for fair housing basically for as long as that legal concept has existed. So we know the city. We have been in Buffalo for decades, and we are committed to this region.
Making it a more equitable How old are you about now?
I'm about half that.
Yeah,
but,
half that.
Yeah. But as an organization, we've been around for a while, fighting for people's rights and making sure that people in Buffalo and the surrounding areas are given equal treatment under the law.
That's why I asked Austin, how did he get in contact? I mean, how did you meet up with these young folks? I mean, I love to see young folks in the studio taking precedence in our community on all aspects. Brother Simba, that's who I follow behind. And now I see you guys here doing the same thing. So, Austin, how did that happen? I mean,
so like we were talking about, home has been a part of my personal speaking journey forever. And I think the reason why I ally and partner with organizations such as Home is because they have something that a lot of people want in the community, whether it's the police or the other organizations. Because the question that constantly comes up is, how do you build retinue? How do you build reputation in a relationship with the community? And I think it comes down to stepping foot in, walking down and meeting people where they are. So for me, when I was young, trying to speak, I got in touch with.
You guys keep saying you're young. I mean, y'all still young.
Yeah, as I am young. When I was a year ago or 2 years ago, when I was just starting to speak, I actually got in touch with the fund manager over at Home, which is Miss Wendy Mednick. A shout out to Miss Wendy if she's listening. But through getting in touch with her, she was first a business mentor more, if anything. I got to just listen to her and hear how she got to where she got to with the hard work of that. But she made the connection to even get me on the show. She introduced me to Jim Anderson, and the rest is history. I've been coming here ever since. But even within that relationship, having them on the show a couple times. Last year, I got an award, my first speaking award through them, which was recognizing my possibilities. Yes. It was a future trust that I was in my potential to be a future advocate for housing issues, but issues as a whole, right? To be an advocate for a better world and a better Buffalo and more change, the change that we talk about to actualize it. So I think that communication.
Man, your mom looking at you, boy. She's so proud of you. She's rolling up.
And they gave that to me. So, and I'm very appreciative for it. So it's a relationship that's been very strong. So Home has always played a big role in the community. And I think even going back to, as a question I'd like to ask you guys as members of that team, as people that have been a part of that process, what does it take? What are the steps to build a relationship with a community, and why is Home so effective at it?
I mean, it's hard for me to say that because that process started a long time before I joined Home. You know, I started working at Home in 2018. And, you know, to a large extent, Home had already built that rapport with people. People who know that we are here trust us because we've been around for a while. But there are still way too many people who don't know that we exist, which is part of my job and Sierra's job over here, making sure that people know about Home, know about the services that we offer, know that we are going to fight for people's rights. You know, so part of it is getting the word out about what we do and making sure that people know their rights. But another part of it is word of mouth. People say to their friends, like, oh, when I had that kind of situation, Home helped me. And having people say that and vouch for us, you know, spreads that trust. When somebody you know has had a good experience with an organization and can share that information, that really helps. And, you know, after an organization like us has been around for 60 plus years, there's quite a few people who have had that kind of experience. So.
And I think there's also, like you said, Stephen, in building that trust, it's giving people the comfort and space to be able to tell their story. From my vantage points, I've only been with Home since October, but
Oh, you knew.
what was that?
You're very new.
Yes,
Yes.
but at the same time, I come from previously working on like campaigns for
Yes.
Democratic candidates, and just like the trust is through relationship building, or it's people saying like, hey, I have this other issue, I want to come back to you again and maintain that rapport, or also just even checking in on someone you may have helped out with a couple weeks ago. That 2-minute call can work just wonders for folks. And just again from the community standpoint, making sure that we're looking out for each other. We all have a vested interest, because it could be me in that situation further down the road, and vice versa.
How many staff members you guys have? You have a young lady here with you as well. Can I not mention who she is here? Because we want to see so much. You probably got a big staff for 60 years. It's great. But what happens when you get a call from a young person saying that the landlord is charging us money because the toilet broke, or the carpet is done and I want my rent money back, or my security deposit back, and it's tore up and he want to move out? Do you get those type of questions? Or
yeah, I'll often get those types of questions. And again, going back to kind of like what I said of how is it that in worst case scenario a judge may look at it. So oftentimes when it comes to a security deposit, like making sure you're aware and it's clearly written out, like in a lease, like what the landlord is or isn't responsible for, but also if there is something that may happen, documenting it, so that way you have that snapshot in time, that evidence. And even, or if it's something with getting your security deposit, you like doing a final walkthrough with the landlord, ensuring that there's no like discrepancy or dispute. You have a right, that you're entitled to do that, ensuring if there is any money that you may be losing out on your security deposit, that you're getting that like an itemized receipt outlining why, and ensuring that you get that back within a timely manner. Because if you don't get your security deposit back within about like 14 business days or so, then the landlord may forfeit any claim to it. The security deposit's technically like
we ain't know that
property.
Yeah, it's important for people to know that it's landlords don't have all the time in the world to get the deposit back to you. So if they're dragging their feet, they might not have any right to it anymore. So yeah, if you move out of somewhere and you don't hear anything from your landlord about your security deposit one way or the other within 14 days, you can take the landlord small claims court to get that deposit back.
All of it. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, the landlord does have a right to use it for repairs that are beyond normal wear and tear.
Mm-hmm.
But if they want to do that, they have to give an itemized list of what repairs they spent it on within those 14 days to explain why they didn't return the money.
And it's that. Oh, and I think we're gonna go to commercial break. We'll be right back after the commercial break.
We're still on Facebook Live. That's your piece that you wrote, correct?
Correct.
And you read, that's the book you read?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, and you were saying like that was one of the largest gathering of people.
So that book specifically, his thesis, what it really talks about is it really helped me understand where we got to both in the public, and like the transitional housing, as they'll say, how that kind of turned out how it is. Because I was working with the municipal housing, the director of it at the time. I was trying to partner with him and see if I could come in and help. And though that partnership didn't happen, I wanted to just be informed. And so hearing about the Perry Heights, when you're driving down street, sometimes we just see things. But because I live right outside of Buffalo and Cheektowaga, I don't know the history of these things. I don't have family that necessarily can sit me down and tell me. And I don't think most people can, even if they have lived here. And so it just really opened my eyes to understand some of the mottos and things that were used to get us where we are, some of the practices, discriminatory and not, and how they worked, and even some of the fear that people still harbor today about the suburbs and the scarcity and what will happen if these people hit this neighborhood. So it just kind of opened my eyes to how we got to where we got to. So it was a really useful book. Are there any areas specific you guys would like to go to? I know that housing is big, but I only know quite so much. So is there any specific points you guys want to touch on as we go to the second half? I don't want to kind of just...
Do you have anything, James?
It's up to you. I'm just kind of following the lead here.
I know I just went through and looked at our numbers of discrimination reports from 2023, so I could mention that.
I think another thing another thing that's really topic right now is a lot of people are getting tax returns. So this is when everyone wants to move. And just because you have the wisdom, landlords know it's tax return time too when people have extra money. So I just think that this is a great opportunity to talk about like why you shouldn't just leave that apartment with all the furniture and just because you got a tax return and go somewhere else. Or vice versa, how you can protect yourself if you get this lump sum of money, what you need to disclose, what you don't. He's coming back.
And we're right back in the show. We left off kind of talking broadly, but we have some specific points that we want to hit on as we return back into the show. As we get broad, I know there was a fact you wanted to talk about, or a statistic you wanted to talk about to kind of give us a better picture, because numbers sometimes are easier for us to picture than words. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So last year, we had the most discrimination reports we received in any of the 60 years we have existed. We had almost 500 reports of housing discrimination. So it's really kind of a sobering number. You know, that's not necessarily all of the times that it happened to people, that housing discrimination happened to people. That's just the times that people came to us and said, hey, I believe I experienced discrimination. You know, discrimination is not going away. We have made progress as far as discrimination and stopping discrimination over decades. But discrimination is still very real. It still exists. It still happens to people. You know, people are still discriminated against based on their race, based on their disability, based on the fact that they have kids who live with them, based on their source of income. Those are the most common types of discrimination that we see. You know, it's important for people to be aware that, you know, if you think that you experience discrimination, you may have, and you shouldn't just ignore that and just deal with it. Like there are things that can be done. And so if somebody believes that they experienced housing discrimination, that their landlord or a landlord that they're applying to live at their property, they denied them for an illegal reason, whether it's because of race, disability, whatever, they should report that to us. And then what we do is we take that and we will investigate it. We'll see if there's evidence that discrimination happened, and we'll try to make sure that the person who experienced discrimination gets some justice.
And that's
what is justice? Well, I mean, what is it? Financial?
It depends on the situation. You know, usually we'll ask people what they want to achieve out of the situation. We can't make any promises that that's what they're going to get, but we'll try to get as close as we can. So it's not a one size fits all solution necessarily.
And I think that number is like kind of double-sided, right? Because as we talked about, that's probably not all the discrimination that we've seen. And so as our number gets higher, we want more people to use H.O.M.E, but we want that number to go lower at the same time. So it's kind of that balance.
Exactly.
And kind of speaking of a number, if you want to call in and have any questions about what we're talking about, it's one thing to kind of study the light bulb, but we have Thomas Edisons in the room who know this, who practice this. And so if you want to call in and ask a question, 716-837-1112, you can call in and join the conversation, because it's about people, right? It's about the community. That's what we represent, because it's bigger than the show. It should be felt at home. And one thing that everybody might be going through at this time is tax returns, right? It's around that time of year. And so a lot of decisions start getting made. Sometimes money getting in your hand, you feel a little different, right? You feel a little different. Yeah. Now all of a sudden, that gutter that's leaked, I don't want to deal with that no more. I'm done. This grass is too high. I don't want to touch my ankles, and I don't want to call no more and ask them to cut it. I'm leaving. Give us some advice or some dangers of people around this time of year. Those people that just want to pack up and leave everything where they are and just move on. How to use that maybe smarter, or some different avenues they can go with this money.
Yeah, I mean, the grass sometimes is greener on the other side, sometimes it's not. So it's important not to just jump to moving out just because there are a few things that are wrong. Maybe it is the best decision for you, but it's important to know certain rights that are available to people so that you don't get taken advantage of. First of all, if you are going to move somewhere new, like we said, after you move out, the landlord has 14 days to either return your security deposit to you or explain exactly what repairs they spent it on.
And take all your stuff with you. Don't leave your cat or your couch. You have to take everything out.
Landlords do have to keep people's belongings for a month at least after they move out. They can't just throw them away immediately. So
can they charge storage?
That is, they can, yeah. So again, the best choice is to bring your stuff with you. If you don't, it shouldn't get thrown out. It is not allowed to be thrown out. That doesn't make it smart to leave it there.
What about eviction? If you get evicted?
Yeah, regardless.
Okay.
Landlords can't just throw people's stuff out. It's New York state law. There are some states where they can do that, but here they can't. Also, if you're going to move into a new place, landlords can't charge more for the security deposit than the amount of rent. So if rent is $1,000, the most the security deposit can be is $1,000. They also can't charge first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit up front. Just rent for the first month and the security deposit. That's the only thing a landlord can charge.
Say that again, because I think a lot of people are still using that old philosophy, especially right now.
Yep.
When people have money.
Yeah. So landlords are not allowed to require somebody to pay first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit when somebody moves in. Only the first month's rent and the security deposit. And that's been a New York state law since 2019. So I know there are still some people out there some landlords who are trying to charge that, whether it's because they don't know that that's the law or whether they're just, nobody's stopped them yet. It's been 5 years now. I think it's about time that
and an application fee can't be more. An application fee can't be more than $20 either.
Right. So there are a lot of things that both of those things are things that were added as New York state law in 2019. So it used to be that landlords could do these little things to milk a little more money out of people, but they're not legal anymore. So it's important for people to know that.
And it's this information that I think is so important. That's why I think people sometimes can compartmentalize organizations. So only if I'm dealing with this specific issue can I call home. I think it's extra information people just aren't aware of. And correct me if I'm wrong, can Section 8 be applied to a mortgage?
It can.
Yeah.
I don't know all of the details about how, but it is possible. Yeah.
Right. It's things like this where it's like we can disqualify ourselves and it kind of limits the growth of communities. And we see that as we see our communities unfurl. Despite the discriminatory practices, not knowing will cause you to not ask a lot of questions or make a lot of calls that could let you know, because there's questions we don't even know we need to be asking. Right. And so what are some of these additional situations that people may call home for, and when should home come to mind as I need to call these people because they can solve this issue? Just some more information, some more problems that we can get our mind around besides just outright discriminatory practices.
Yeah, honestly, basically, if you have a gut feeling that what my landlord is doing isn't right, call us. We can tell you whether or not it is legal.
Like
sometimes it is.
Apartment.
Sometimes something seems sketchy,
right,
but it's illegal sketchy, and we can tell you that.
It's
not
apartment.
fun to deliver that news to somebody like, yeah, you got denied because your credit score is too low. That sucks.
What about walking into your apartment? A landlord just walks in, opens up the door on his own, not notifying you constantly. That's that
is an issue. Yeah.
That's the issue.
You have
right?
to give it. Typically, you have to give at least like a 24-hour notice before you want to enter a tenant's dwelling, and also
changing of locks, anything like that. That's criminal. That's criminal.
You can't like you said, you can't just lock someone out, especially if they're moving, lock their possessions, and that's considered an unlawful eviction, and it's the landlord that can be criminally liable because
it is a misdemeanor.
So what about a landlord that tells you only can have but 5 people in your home? Those you can't have extra people over, family members and things like that in the home. Is that part of some questions that you guys get?
In general, no. There are limits to how many people are allowed to live in a certain size of unit, but that's not a landlord. A landlord can't make those rules. Those are municipal occupancy codes. It's a code issue. It's not a landlord issue. So there are situations where there may be, a family of 7 probably is not going to be able to rent a 1-bedroom apartment.
Right.
However, if there is a 4-bedroom apartment and 3 people live there and they bring in somebody else who is hanging out with them, maybe stays the night one night, a landlord can't prevent them from doing that. Also, if somebody needs to bring in 1 additional person to live with them, permanently, they have to notify the landlord if somebody's going to be living there. But as long as that additional person doesn't exceed the occupancy limit and is willing to go through whatever screening process the original tenant did, so including like a background check or a credit check if the original tenant did that, and is willing to put their name on the lease. So there's a few things they have to clear, but as long as those things are true, the landlord can't say, no, you can't live here, as long as they, doesn't exceed the occupancy limit, willing to put their name on the lease and go through the background check.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, we'll have like tenants or that'll give us a call and say like the landlords are trying to like dictate like, who is or isn't like allowed to be, in their homes, but also
No pets.
yeah,
Things like
That is allowed.
Right. That is
yeah.
allowed. Yeah.
But at the same time, if someone has like a service animal or emotional support animal, you have to make that what's called a reasonable accommodation for someone's disability for them to be able to enjoy the full premises. And it's also, you may be making an exception to, a pet policy, but at the same time, it's to ensure you're not discriminating against anyone based upon their basis of disability. Or like another thing too that which fortunately like I haven't like encountered too much, but it does happen, is that there'll be domestic violence situations, and there are provisions where like you can end your like lease like shorter than when it ends, especially if you're in a dangerous situation.
Wow.
Such as that.
When you went there, we get this calls a lot from our organization, Stop the Violence, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Homes that people are selling drugs, and then the landlord can get an eviction much faster than going through the court system. You get calls like that sometimes coming to you.
I'm not sure. I'm not the one who receives those calls directly. Have you,
Right.
James?
I haven't really gotten too many calls regarding that, but I would also, again, it's one thing I always, at least if it's like a landlord that is attempting to evict a tenant, is just like, is it written in the lease, what is considered a sort of like nuisance here,
Right.
or, who, or is this like impacting the quiet enjoyment of the dwelling, especially if there's other tenants that are involved, if like any guests may be like harassing, like, if it's, guests for the downstairs neighbors and they're harassing the upstairs neighbors, ensuring that that all sides are, acting in good faith, but also that the landlord, stops any sort of like harassment, ensures that everyone is safe.
So you represent the landlords and the tenants sometimes, so it can go both ways.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, most of who we interact with, at least who I interact with, are tenants about like 8 or 9 out of 10 times, but it's also ensuring, again, that folks all understand what the law is and how they can best either like use what the law is to understand their situation, to be their best advocate, and to ensure that everyone is acting again in good faith.
So Austin, here it is, the big question. We have a lot of young folks that rent in university district, students, and you seem to have like, students that come in and leave right out after semesters, things like that. That seems to be a problem in the community. Folks be complaining about students just tearing the house up or disrespecting. You get questions about that coming to you a lot in the community?
Sometimes. I mean, that kind of stuff is tricky. Some landlords want to rent to students specifically, and some landlords want to avoid renting to students. Being a student is not a protected class, so there's no such thing as student discrimination according to the law, but it's possible that it could be age discrimination. People are protected against discrimination based on their age, and so if a landlord doesn't want to rent to college students, college students tend to be in a certain age range where they are legally allowed to rent, and so it's possible that could be discrimination based on someone's age. There's the other way around too, though. Sometimes landlords specifically want to rent to students, and the only place that is allowed to rent only to students of a university is housing owned by that university. So, if a landlord has a house on one of those streets right across from UB South, they can't advertise it as student housing because it's not. It's quite possible that they'll end up renting to students because students want to live close to campus, but they can't advertise it as housing only for students. We've had cases where a landlord was renting by the room.
Yes.
That's fine. But if an apartment has 3 rooms, and let's say the landlord wants $300 per room, if a family comes and says, we would like to rent this whole apartment for $900 a month, that's 3 times 3,
right?
The landlord has to be willing to do that if they meet the landlord's criteria, legal criteria for renting an apartment.
And we have a question from Jim Anderson. He said, apartment buildings already occupied are being bought. The new owner comes in and raises the rent. What can tenants do?
It depends on whether the landlord did it legally or not. So unfortunately, landlords can raise the rent. There is no limit to how much they can raise the rent by. They do have to give a certain amount of notice. First of all, if there is a lease in place, the landlord can't raise the rent during the term of the lease. If the lease is up for renewal, then for the renewed lease, they can increase the rent. For any rent raise, they have to give at least 30 days notice before it can go into effect. So basically, if you're month to month, the landlord would have to say, all right, this coming month is going to be your last month at this rate. The following month, it's going to be higher, and tell them what it is. For a lease, it would be 30 days before the lease is set to expire that you have to say, this is what it's going to be next time. And new ownership has to abide by the same rules as the old ownership. There's no special privileges for raising the rent just because you just bought a place. Mm-hmm. You have to give the same kind of notice that the previous owner would have had to give. And if a landlord wants to raise the rent by 5% or more, they have to give longer notice. And that depends on how long a tenant has lived there. If a tenant's been there between 1 and 2 years, they have to give 60 days notice. And if the tenant's been there 2 years or longer, they have to give 90 days notice.
Okay, so these are things that are protecting for people that are like, for his question, when it's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I can't afford next month. I've been living here for how many years? I'm never not gonna have a house. They can call you and get that figured out. Yep. Now, I recognize it is a community change that we need, but on the flip side, landlords and renters alike all exist within the legal side. Looking at the future, right, because we are where we are right now, but housing opportunities that equal doesn't just focus on where we are, but they also fight on the legal side to make sure we can get the legislation passed to protect these changes. What are some legislation that's either currently in the pipeline that has passed or we're looking to pass to fix some future changes or things that we can just look to see on that legal side of housing opportunities?
One piece of proposed legislation that H.O.M.E supports is right to counsel. Currently, New York City has right to counsel, which establishes a legal right for people to have legal representation in housing court. Right now in Buffalo, there's kind of a mishmash of different agencies that provide legal assistance to most people in housing court, but it's not the best solution. And if there was the statewide right to counsel, then anyone in housing court would have a right to have a lawyer represent them, which would help a lot of people avoid getting evicted.
And especially like a lot of the folks that I work with, like they'll tell me about their experiences in housing court of, oh, I just met this lawyer from like Neighborhood Legal Services or another legal agency, and we were only spoke for a few minutes. So just in part, like when they come to us, and I know not to be like a dead horse, like, do what you need to do to be prepared in worst case scenario, that it's ensuring that whatever time that they do have with an attorney or a housing court, that they can make it as productive and fruitful as possible.
I think Rebecca Towns now, the judge Rebecca Towns was with Legal Aid Services, and now she's a judge. So some of them things help us. With your book that you have here, I see the picture of what that is. That City Hall, or is that
Yeah, this is City Hall. It's a picture of it being built in 1930, and this image was actually found. So this is published through my former employer at Burning Books, which is at 420 Connecticut Street, if anyone wants to check it out. But anyways,
but it has information that the community needs to know. Is it tell you anything in there that I can read or to help families out along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just not only understanding and how we got here, but this whole story when I hope is that this is communicating, and I hope us may be able to speak on that too. Reading it is that it shows that Buffalo's Black community has never been silent through any of this. There's been a persistent and rich history of activism.
Yes.
Like the Buffalo Urban League, the NAACP, just regular folks like writing to either the Challenger or the Criterion. Folks forming block clubs and councils, all the way to the work that H.O.M.E started in the 60s, so on and so forth. And even just, again, like, just even some of the work that, we're seeing done with like the East Side Parkways Coalition, or just even, the response of Buffalo's Black community following May 14th, 2022.
I don't want to cut you off, but as we kind of close out, we're kind of closing out the last couple of minutes. We did a call on someone who wanted to ask a question, maybe just add a perspective. So as we close out, caller, you are on the air. We can hear you.
Repeat the question.
I'm sorry, we could not hear you. Could you just repeat the question one more time for us? No, you're all good.
Man, we have some technical difficulties here right now in this station, so we will see how we can answer your question.
You didn't turn it on.
Yes. And move forward there, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, what I was saying is that I have a new owner, landlord, and then February 1st, they brought me a notice of rent, saying that the rent will be increased by $300 on April the 1st. Do they have to give me longer terms than April 1st?
If you have a month-to-month agreement and you've lived there for less than 2 years, then they have given you enough notice. If you've been there for longer than 2 years, or if you have a lease that is in effect until after April 1st, then they would need to give you longer. So it depends on the details of your situation. If you would like, you can give us a call at 854-1400, and you can speak to one of James's colleagues in the Fair Housing Department, and they can help you with that.
Yeah, my lease will expire next month, in March.
Okay.
I think we want to go into your question. We're kind of leaving out the booth right now, so we're going to kind of close the show. But next time we have H.O.M.E on, this is why I recommend we call in. Yep, absolutely. Have a good rest of your day. That's why I recommend we call in at 716-837-1112 early, because we only got them for so long. As we kind of leave out the booth, as our time, like I said, is getting to a close, are there any last words you guys would like to leave with as we head out in our last 2 minutes?
All right. Well, I just want to say it's a tremendous honor to be invited on here, not only in my capacity to talk about just my research, but to continue the great work that I've been doing with H.O.M.E. And it's a pleasant surprise also to see Mr. Holman as well. So I know you both do fantastic and tremendous work for the community. Your presence here, it's been like medicine for the soul. So it's been just like very wholesome and a great way to start the week for me.
We appreciate it, Steve.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on again. I just want to remind people, if you have a question, if you wonder whether what happened to you in your housing situation was legal or not, don't hesitate to contact us. You can call us at 716-854-1400. You can also go to our website at homeny.org, and there's buttons in the top right corner where you can submit a request for assistance. So, even if you have no idea, like this seems wrong, but I don't know if it is, we want to help you understand what your rights are, and so don't hesitate to reach out to us, please.
Absolutely. Thank
Right,
you.
right. So I'm gonna leave you with this. Stop the bleeding prevention incident will be taking place February 23rd at Meriwether Library. Come out from 4 o'clock to 5:45. It's Stop the Bleeding. It shows you about that there. Bill Hoker will be doing that special for that at the Meriwether Library. That is on a Friday, February 23rd.
All right, we're heading out. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, Buffalo. See you next week. Bye.
That's it.
That's it. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Call this a situation.